Welcome to our webinar today, Self-Regulation in the Classroom. We really love this quote from Socrates, "To know thyself is the beginning of all wisdom." And what we hope for you today is that you take away some improved awareness around regulation and learning regulation, and just reflecting upon this quote, knowing thyself.
The objectives that we have for you as you embark on this training with us is to uncover the developmental foundations of learning. Because many of us, we understand what we want our kids and our students to learn, but we don't always understand what goes into learning and what is required for a student to be successful in learning. We also want you to see what can impact a student's self-regulation abilities. And we're going to examine tools and techniques to promote the student's focus and attention within the classroom. We've created this mind map to help you to see where we are throughout this training. So first, as you see, we're going to start with number 1. You're going to meet the speakers, and we're going to go all the way around. So if you have to leave or come back, you know exactly where we are in that spot in this presentation. We are coming together as 2 American board-certified and licensed occupational therapists. Myself, I'm an occupational therapist from the United States and a public researcher. I live here in Belgium, and I love supporting teachers, parents, really, and to understand kids and understand students and some of their challenges and how we can best support them.
And my name is Christy Troutman, and Elizabeth and I have come together to collaborate on this program, Self-Regulated Learning. You're going to hear a lot more about it. I myself am also an OT from the US, currently living in the Netherlands. I've been supporting international schools for many years over several countries. And I'm also a mother of children who went through an international school system as well as public school in the US. We're hosting this webinar through the International Forum of Inclusion Practitioners. And just to give you a quick background, we had the opportunity to present together on this very topic in Greece, where we met Daniel Sobel from Inclusion Expert. And he has developed this forum, and we've come together to collaborate where we are now leading on a sub-forum within that, called the Specialists and Therapists Forum, because we really do appreciate this quote and believe in this. The power of one, if fearless and focused, is formidable, but the power of many working together is better. And you can just read through here the key challenges that we're hoping that we can address when we're coming together in this forum. Within our forum, we are hosting many events, and right now there's several free events. Self-Regulation for Learning is ours. Last month, Margarita hosted the School Wellbeing webinar, and that is available through our resource center. We also are hosting a meeting of the minds on a monthly basis, and we have an upcoming assistive technology and inclusion webinar, another free webinar that's going to be hosted in December. So please come and check us out.
We're here to talk about self-regulation in the classroom because this is a topic that more and more teachers are coming to us and looking for support. A lot of the work and tools that we will share with you, they stem from some of the work by Dr. Shanker, who is from Canada. And I love this quote: "When we work on a child's self-regulation, we are creating that stable internal platform that makes growth possible. Any and all kinds of growth." And I think as adults, we know when we aren't self-regulated, when we haven't gotten enough sleep, when we aren't working at our best, it's harder for us as well. And the same is for our students. So how can we create that environment in our classroom to support them, right? Well, I think the first part of that is understanding what it takes for a student to learn and perform those academic tasks. So as you see in this pyramid, the academic skills and tools and things that they're learning in school, are right at the top. Math, handwriting, reading comprehension. This is where educators spend most of their time supporting students in acquiring these top skills. But look at all of the things down below, all those different skills that are required for development to be able to achieve these higher levels of skills and abilities. And as occupational therapists, we really focus on the foundation of developmental skill building, because we know when a child has poor body scheme and poor body awareness, their ability to have awareness and spatial awareness on the page for writing is going to be compromised. We understand when their sensory system may not be interpreting the different sensory things around in their environment. They may be interpreting differently. It's going to impact their ability to learn and attend and focus and modulate that sensory information visually and auditorily into meaningful responses to work, to be a successful student. So really, as OTs, we evaluate and treat students and children on these lower skills so they can be more successful for educators in the classroom to complete the educational requirements. Now, some of you are OTs that are part of this, and some of you are educators. So just to give you a little bit more of a description of what occupational therapists do within the educational setting. Now, it looks different in different settings for our capacity of what we do. So even though we're called occupational therapy, sometimes we're referred to as OTs. So as you see with this tree of learning, I love this illustration. So in the academic setting in schools, you're focusing on that top tier, the writing, the vocabulary, the reading, problem solving, listening skills, communication skills. These are all required to be successful in the schools. But as OTs, we're down in the root. We're working on those root foundational skills, the auditory channel, the ability to keep attention and focus, the processing of information, and then listening and learning and retaining that information. We're working on those sensory skills and foundation to be able to be a successful student. So this is what OTs do. We will come in and see where in this hierarchy or this chain of learning is that student having trouble with, and then we will focus and work on that area. So one of the things we found with regulation, and as you will see very soon, all the different areas of self-regulation in the classroom we're going to talk about. What I want to do now is I want to share a quote with you as we start into the learning process. Teaching is a greatest act of optimism. How does that feel when you hear that as an educator and a teacher? I hope you feel good and that empowers you. The second thing I want to do is, as occupational therapists, we understand everything's connected. We're a very holistic practice. We understand that movement, moving the body and the mind, everything works together. So I'm going to give you one of my favorite movement tools to help you as increase your focus and attention as we get into this next step. This is a really great one. There are many different movement tools that we can do in the classroom, but this is one where it's easy. You don't have to move. You don't have to get up. So I like to call this one waking up the brain and opening up the head for learning. So what I want you to do is you are going to simply, and it's so important that you do this with me because you need to feel what it feels like. Whenever I give these strategies for students, I always tell teachers, do them as well, because everyone needs to be regulated in the classroom. So what you're going to do is you're going to start by putting your fingers right here in the middle of the forehead, and I call it opening the forehead, getting ready to learn. And you're going to have a little bit of pressure in there. And you're going to just keep going, and you're going to open the whole head up for ideas and learning. And some of these come from Qigong movements. So we're just going to open it up, and we're just helping to relax some of these muscles back here that get tight and block the flow of oxygen to the brain right here, especially the ones under the neck. So you're just going to kind of pull and down. I know this one feels so good for me. You're just going to pull it down. So we're just relaxing these muscles. Get more oxygen. Take a minute. How do you feel after that? I know I feel better. And the next thing I will show you, one other trick, is we unroll the ears to get ready to hear. So all we do is we just come up here and we just roll. We start at the top and we just unroll the ears. And then we just give them a little pull out. So we're ready to learn. If you take a break, I know I feel much better in my head for learning. And it's just a great way to stimulate the body for the kids to come inward instead of outward. So they're ready to learn, sit, and focus.
Thank you, Elizabeth. How do I follow that up? But I'm going to try. So what we want to dive into now is self-regulated learning. But first, we want to do a little bit of background. So let's define what is self-regulation. And I think this is so important because research has been coming out about self-regulation. And the most important part that's being identified is the ability to define it. So within a school, if you're making this part of an ethos for your school, being able to identify what is self-regulation, what are your priorities in your school? And what it is a process that assists students in managing their thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. And let's expand this. It's not just students, it's all of us being able to process that and to be able to monitor that. Most importantly, it's a cyclical process, right? So it's being able to do a task, monitor that task, monitor performance, and then give feedback to ourselves, rebuilding that self-awareness, being able to move forward on, the following tasks. So that's the basis of self-regulation. We're going to get into the more of the detailed components of self-regulated learning. So what we have done is we've put together a model for self-regulated learning as OTs, and you're going to hear more about each of these components as we go through, but often OTs, if you've worked with them, you've heard them focus on that sensory regulation piece. And like I said, we're going to go into more details, but we can't talk about self-regulated learning without looking at all these components, how they affect each other, how they are all one regulated body within us. So social emotional regulation and cognitive regulation all feed into that. Okay, I know everybody is probably familiar or may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so we've used another pyramid side by side with the tree that Elizabeth showed you earlier to really give another visual in understanding these components of self-regulated learning. So we have that sensory base, that physiological base, the social emotional components, and then the cognitive at the top where that learning really happens. So as we're going through the webinar today, really want to challenge you to think about, what does it mean to you? What does self-regulated learning mean to you? Because we're going to be having some talks later and challenging you as some takeaways with how you can incorporate some strategies in your classrooms or in the work that you're doing. So really ask yourself as you're going through this, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to my classroom? Again, a little back information to support this. So universal design for learning, why is this important? If you're a teacher, you've heard of UDL, right? It is that ability to design or compose an environment that can be accessed and understood by all students. It gives every student a chance to succeed. What we have found as OTs is that when we're working with students, one-on-one with students, and we're taking students back into the classroom, talking to teachers, giving suggestions for strategies, the teachers come back to us and say, I wish I knew that, or can I try this with another student? I have another one that may benefit. Yes, absolutely. That's what we're finding. If we have a strategy for one student, I bet there's other students in the classroom that are going to benefit from the same strategy. And to really take this to another level, I'm going to move on to the next slide, because what this helps demonstrate is exactly what I said. So we're all sensory beings, and we're all neurodiverse beings. And we're going to share a video with you that breaks that down a little bit more and explains neurodiversity versus neurodivergence. And I'll come back to this topic after the video, but take a look at this and think about your class at the same time. We're just going to get the video pulled up.
Thank you for your patience as we switch the screens. Okay.
Are neurodiverse? This is not only a question for you, but for employers who ask this question, it's one of the surefire ways to send engagement, productivity, and inclusivity through the roof. To understand neurodiversity, it is helpful to imagine a bucket and some balls of different sizes and colors. Your brain is the bucket, no offense intended, and your different cognitive traits are the balls. The makeup of our traits is unique to us, which is why we all think, move, act, and communicate differently. Each trait is a ball of a specific color and size. If you have lots of one type of trait, you will have lots of the same balls, in which case they pile up together. Sometimes, if there are enough balls, they can pile up and reach what is called a diagnostic threshold. When this threshold is crossed, someone is considered neurodivergent. It happens when there is more of one particular trait than you might expect to see, and means a person is recognized as having a condition. It could be ADHD, dyslexia, or something else. What the condition is will depend on the types of traits. So going back to neurodiversity, this neurodivergent threshold may not apply to you. You may have a variety of balls, but not a large number of any one type. Lots of cognitive traits, but nothing that would be recognized and given a name, even though these may be the same characteristics that in someone else are recognized. It's a question of degree. And some of the characteristics mean that people face challenges. Differences in the way they do some things may mean not fitting into what society considers normal or typical. For example, in the way they understand what's being said to them, or in how they focus on a task, which may contrast to what is normally expected. Whilst everyone is different, these differences are simply based on the mix of traits that most of us have. And so, to answer the question at the beginning of this video, we are all neurodiverse, but we're not all neurodivergent.
Okay, so in looking at that video and watching that video, I'm hoping you were able to relate it not only to some of your students, but maybe to yourself as well. And just a kind of a personal note here, you know, when looking at those buckets and those balls, I know for me, I have a lot of those balls in the auditory area, right? Because I am really bothered by sounds quite easily and quite quickly. So having strategies to support me on that could be helpful, because some days I may need that. Other days I may choose that I don't need that. And I think, you know, as you're going to go through when we get into the sensory processing area, especially, you're going to see some of that mix, but having these supports available, having students understand themselves more in order to know what strategies they can have access to or want access to is really important. So these are the things we want you to think about as we take you through the different components.
So now we are going to go into the different components of a self-regulated learner. So we are going to start with sensory regulation. So before we talk about sensory regulation, we need to just dabble a little bit into sensory integration. So basically, this is a normal process. Everyone has a sensory system. We all take information from our senses, whether it's what we see, what we hear, what we feel. Our brain interprets this information, relates it to past experiences or our current state of being right now, makes sense of that, and then we have a behavior or a physical output, a response. Now, When you think of sensory regulation, like I just said, it's what we see, what we hear, but it's also what we experience. It's our movements. It's how our body relates to gravity. So once we take all that in, we have the output, the attend, to be able to attend, to demonstrate knowledge, to learn, interact with others. The output is what educators focus on, right? Self-control, interacting with the environment. But all of this happens in response to the way that sensory information is taken in and regulated and integrated and modulated by that student. So understanding the sensory system in that realm can really support educators. So when we talk about sensory regulation, it is the sensory processing. So it's the senses that come in, the processing of that sensory input, the self-awareness of how one is processing, which is something that I think we really would like to see more of, because the more you're aware of how you're processing the information, the more you can support yourself if that is causing you to have difficulties in the classroom. And then self-monitor. So regulation is really those three things. So what does sensory regulation look like? A regulated student. This is what we want to see every student be able to do, right? Have sufficient energy and sustained energy throughout the day, not highs and lows, right? Not that child that's so energetic they can't sit, or that other child that just cannot stay awake in class, right? Their regulation of that energy is impacted, and it'll impact their ability to learn and to focus. The ability to recoup after challenging situations, follow routines, adjust to changes. So when our sensory system is regulated, this is what you're going to be able to do. This is what we want to see our students do. But so often there are components that are going to impact our regulation. And this is everyone. This isn't just your students that really shine out and you see that they're not able to sit at all. This is all of us have our own sensory regulation things that can impact. Lack of sleep. If you have lack of sleep, it's going to be hard to focus and attend, right, that next day. Some kids, when you're hungry or thirsty, it's going to be hard to focus. I love when educators have water bottles in their classrooms, because it really does help kids to be able to drink and think throughout the day. Need for more input. I learn so much better when I'm moving. When I have meetings and I'm doing things and moving, I'm so much more productive than when I'm sitting. That's just me and my sensory needs for what works with me and helps me to regulate. So it's great to understand what we need, but also what impacts us. Some students, a busy class environment is really difficult for them to be able to focus. Even just the sound of someone behind them rustling through their papers to get out their work can, a student that's very sensitive to auditory information, that can distract them, and then they forget what they were doing. So it's just good to know what impacts a student's sensory regulation in the classroom to focus.
And we're going to similarly go through the next two components, the first being the social emotional regulation. And again, I think realizing everything that it impacts and then everything that can impact it is really important to build our awareness as teachers, but also within our students. Social emotional regulation impacts our social skills, our ability to take perspective, make decisions, to have awareness of ourselves, but also of situations. So social emotional regulation definitely can impact a lot, but also if you look at these, you can see that overlap of that sensory regulation piece. When we look at social emotional regulation, what do we want in our students? What are we hoping for? And that ability to be resilient, the ability to recover from challenging situations is an important one. It's also that willingness to, and interest to experiment and learn and realize that making a mistake is okay and being able to recover from that. Students who have strong social emotional regulation have the ability to understand and respond to others, have that empathy, demonstrate empathy, sense of humor, and just that ability to read social situations at a developmental level. Okay, clearly all of these things have developmental components. So we are not expecting the early years children to be able to resolve conflicts in the same way we do grade 4. So when you're looking at this, depending on what level you are teaching, keep that in mind. We're definitely looking at this from a developmental lens as well. It's important. So what can impact social emotional regulation? I'm not going to read through all of them, but I think it's important to remember that, yes, we know life changes can impact social emotional regulation. We know if we hear one of our students' families is going through a separation or a divorce, we know that can impact that child. But even positive life changes that are happening can be impactful. And we need to realize that that can impact how the child is behaving, responding, regulating within a classroom. I think a big one right now, as we're putting this out around November, December, and holidays and break times, are changes in routine. So even children who do not have a diagnosis, who are not labeled as neurodivergent, all of us sensory beings are impacted by this. If you're in an area that celebrates Halloween and the candy that comes in, you can see that this can be very impactful to a classroom. And the final component is cognitive regulation. When we talk cognitive regulation, we're talking those executive function skills. Executive functioning skills happen in our frontal lobe. They are not fully developed until mid-20s. So again, from a developmental perspective, we really need to look at how can we support our students with cognitive regulation throughout school, because even students who don't struggle with this do struggle with this developmentally, because again, we're not fully developed. That's that ability to initiate a task, to organize, to monitor, to have impulse control, to have flexible thinking. Working memories, that ability to have that information, manipulate information in our mind, and then be able to give an output. So if working memory is not the objective of the task, let's look at ways to support that working memory for students who may need that support. And what does cognitive regulation look like? That's the student who is able to focus or switch focus in the middle of a task to another task. They're able to multitask, as we call it. They're willing to try different approaches and strategies, so it's great to be able to find a strategy that works for you, but that willingness to be able to switch over when that strategy isn't quite working. Do we know other strategies? To be able to ask for support, knowing ourselves, learning about our ways we think, knowing when we can ask for help, and the ability to maintain and organize materials, which is a big one right now. So what can impact cognitive regulation? Again, these are not fully inclusive. Our visuals, we try to bring some obvious ones that you're going to see in your classrooms, but this is not all inclusive. But the pressure of note-taking or being able to understand how to take notes, keep up taking notes, that can impact the ability to cognitively regulate, as well as being called on without warning. That pressure that a child or a student may feel in that situation can impact their ability to give output in the way they may do it if they're supported in a different way or given a strategy in a different way. Also, time demands. Time demands for some, and this is the reason we need to explore too, is sometimes time demands can be really beneficial for certain students, and sometimes it can be pressure and difficult for a student if they have to meet a certain time demand. I've already talked about organization, and I'm going to address that later in a case study where we present these in a very different way.
So now let's see some of these theories we've shared with you. Let's look at the tools in action. So where we take the knowledge of the sensory system and understanding our needs for regulation, let's see what happens when they are put into place into this educational system. So in this first case study that I want to share with you, I had the honor of giving this training, but it's a little bit more in depth within one of the international schools in Estonia. And the training was over two modules. So the first day I came and I shared a lot of this, but more in depth with all of the different areas. And then I came back a second time to really talk about integrating some of the tools and different strategies. And we went a little further. So the first session, and I was sharing the information, I saw one teacher there and you could just tell he was looking at me like, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this in my classroom. And I don't know how I'm going to do this. This class is really hard. I don't know if this is going to work. And so I didn't expect, I expected a lot of questions from him the second time I came in. So the next session came and I asked, so I gave him a few tools and we shared really that sensory component, what can impact children's learning and focusing and attention, and gave a few strategies and asked, all right, but I want teachers to create their own strategies because everyone has their own needs and classroom dynamics. So he was a middle school teacher and he raised his hand. He said, I want to share with you what I did. He said, I have a group of students that come in right after lunch and it's really hard to get them to focus. They're still talking. They're very loud. They're excited. It's after lunch. So he said, I took what you had said about really looking at the need for movement to regulate, and especially movement for pressure and heavy work. And so he said, I told them, I want everyone line up after you come in, you put your stuff on your desk, you line up at the door in a single file, very quietly as you can. And then you're going to run. You have them run up the stairs and then go across the top floor and run down the stairs as quietly as possible because the other classes are there. So he said, you have to go very, very quietly once you go past the rooms, but then come down the stairs and do that 3 times. Now, I always say whenever you give a activity for movement or sensory strategies in classroom, always have rules and boundaries because kids will test them, right? So they did. They would go up, they didn't disturb anyone, but he said it was amazing because then when they come down and they would sit and they'd be ready for class, they were so much more focused and working collaboratively together. They let out all their energy. So this was a strategy that really worked for him. So this is just one way of incorporating movement, and you can do it many different ways. Some people use wall push-ups or chair push-ups or the one I just showed you to help your kids regain focus through integrating movement in the classroom. So now we're going to share with you another case study with social emotional learning and regulation.
And this is where I think Elizabeth and I could go on and on and on with case studies. And so what we tried to do was pull one from each category, sensory, social, emotional, and cognitive to try to share, as well as trying to hit the different levels. So Elizabeth talked about this in middle school. And in a similar situation, this is a primary school. So this case study is a grade 4 classroom with similar difficulties. After breaks and recess and after lunch, the teacher had a lot of trouble getting the kids to settle down. They usually come to the carpet to do a mini lesson before they go back to their desk to work on the lesson. But what she was identifying was that it was more conflict between kids. They were coming in complaining about things that had happened. And so it was more of a conflict than energy, that what she identified as her regulation issue. So what she did was she put in place a way for kids to show how they were feeling to her, but also to check in with themselves. So this is just, I'm going to show you another slide, but this slide shows a scale that Elizabeth and I have put together as part of our self-regulated learning that hits all of those areas, social, emotional, sensory, and cognitive. And so she used a similar scale, but what she did was she split it up. So she developed 3 large cards in her classroom. The one large card was that kind of highly activated, maybe angry, feeling not in control card. She had the green card, which was that learning area, feeling centered, focused, and ready to learn. And then she had the blue card, which we call it deactivated, maybe feeling down, maybe feeling sad, maybe just, I'm not ready to do this. And this was a learning activity she did together with the counselor. So the counselor also presented these topics during their course of lessons, and every student had a clothespin with their name on it. When they came in from breaks and recess and lunch, they grabbed it became a habit in the classroom. They grabbed their clothespin, they went over and they put it on the board that they were feeling at the time. What this did was it gave them a moment to check in with themselves, to really decide, where am I? It gave the teacher some feedback of what was coming up to the carpet. But then they also practiced different tools for each of these zones and areas that they could do. So if they were on that red card, they knew, maybe I need to stop, take 3 breaths before I come to the carpet, or the teacher could see that and just have a quick chat with that child, maybe take some deep breaths before you come. So it was just, and it didn't take a lot of time. And it was a great way to build that awareness and monitoring for the classroom. And she saw a really good improvement in them being able to come in and get started. And the third case study is actually took place in a language arts high school classroom. And this was post-pandemic. And I don't think this was a unique situation from what I've heard from teachers, that after the pandemic, where kids were studying at home and it was all online, being able to come back into the classroom and be organized with paper and pencil or just with materials was very, very difficult. So this is what the teacher identified as the challenge in her classroom, was organization. And so what she did several things. One thing they did is they realized kids weren't remembering their pencils, as simple as that, but they didn't have to have pencils at home and they just weren't bringing them. So they decided to have a pencil box at the front. You know, it's a high school class. It was just a box where there were pencils. They could just come in. It wasn't an issue because they could just go grab that. And then she also went through, you know, how do we take notes, but then gave them a paper, as you can see here, that had just some reminders, things we've talked about on note taking, sequencing, how to structure using these, how to structure writing assignments. So using these graphic organizers. And she had these available depending on the assignment in the classroom to support those kids. Again, some students didn't need that. Other students did, and it wasn't looked at as something different. They just went and grabbed that paper to get themselves started. And that, again, she saw a big improvement with that when organization was identified. It wasn't the learning that was the difficulty, but it was because the organization was impacting it so much.
I love this quote. Awareness, and I added an open mind, is the first step towards change. So really, as you know, one of our main goals here today was to give you more awareness of a self-regulated learner and what is involved within learning. Because I think now, as we see, you know, neurodiverse and neurodivergent individuals becoming more and more predominant in our classroom and different learning needs, I think we have to, the era of where we gave information and expected the students to be able to just learn and retain and do it is changing. I think we have to give them this tools now and show them how to learn, how to organize themselves, how to keep time management, how to work as a team, how to collaborate with others, how to understand their own sensory system, and what they need to feel regulated to be more alert or to be more calm. These are skills and strategies our students, everyone needs, but especially our students right now. So as we went through the different characteristics of sensory regulation, social emotional regulation, and cognitive regulation, there are different tools we used to support you as a self-regulated learner who was watching. So I don't know if you picked that up. We did ask earlier in the last one, where some people gave us different answers of, you know, obviously this one, right? This was a tool we used to help you to regulate your arousal level by doing something that was stimulating and organizing to your brain, especially helping more blood flow here, the frontal lobe, problem solving. We need our kids here more, right? So that was one sensory regulation tool. We also movement. We did a little bit of that. We kind of stretched the ears, and I shared with you the case studies about movement. There was one with social emotional. I gave you that quote before doing the movement, and I asked you how that made you feel. When we feel good, when we feel safe, when we feel happy, and we're having fun, we're more likely to learn and retain. When we're feeling unsafe or worried or stressed or fearful, our brains we're in fight or flight mode. We're not open to learning as much, especially remembering. So by giving a positive quote in the morning, maybe writing it on the board as an educator, start the day off with a positive feeling, that can help our students as well as us. And the third one was cognitive regulation. We did several different strategies with that. You saw the mind map in the beginning. We gave you a map of what we were going to take you through today to learn more about self-regulated learning. So you understood before we even started the process we were going to do. We also gave little pieces in the middle, so you knew how long and how far we were through it. And we had a lot of pictures. So we helped different learners, those visual learners, we gave you pictures to remember some of the strategies, but we also spoke and shared them as well. Is there anything else that you want to add, Christy, as far as tools we used?
No, I think that you addressed a lot of them. I think we used color as well. We kept colors consistent so that sensory regulation was always purple, cognitive regulation blue, and green for social emotional. And that also helps with organization of thought, and also to support that memory when you've got that color code with it. So I think otherwise you definitely address those. We did try to keep some things novel by throwing in a video. Because novelty also keeps us alert. So that's another strategy that we tried to incorporate.
Great, thank you. Novelty is a big thing, I think, for us, absolutely making that brain shift to focus more. So different measures for learning. I love that. So what to do now? You have a base. Start to use some of these strategies. Start to think about that. What could be, if you're seeing a child that's really tired, all right, maybe they need some movement to become more alert. Vice versa. If they're really alert, maybe they need to go take a walk to get some movement to calm down, right? So it works both ways. But also, start to look more into this and plan, reflect, especially for organization and helping students to organize their work. Make a plan with them, monitor how it's working, and then reflect together. What are the obstacles? What can we do together? Now, this is a component. We gave you a snapshot of a program we go much deeper in regulated for learning. So if that's something you want to learn more about, please come join us. We have different variations for how we bring this into the school with different levels, whether it's an 8-week program where we give many different tools and strategies and procedures to bring this in, or if it's giving a little bit more overview and going in depth in all these areas for your educators, we're there to support with that as well. And there's also other programs out there. There is Zones of Regulation that focuses just on regulation. There are no programs I know that do all three, but there are also programs for executive function. There are people in the IFIP that work a lot on metacognition, so elements of the cognitive regulation. So I think it's really good to start looking at where you can start pulling in some of the resources and pulling it into the educational system, because if we can make this foundation stronger for these students, it's going to help throughout their educational years, because when they have the tools to learn, learning is easier. Do you have anything else to add, Christy?
I just wanted to add that we highlighted some of our events on the IFIP and on our forum, and we have a meeting of the minds that we do monthly, and this is where we're really hoping we can get conversation going about how we can collaborate and support one another. And so I think that would be a great event for people to join and join the forum. And so I just wanted to remind you of that, because it's a great way to also get your voice heard for what the needs are. And I just wanted to also just reiterate what Elizabeth said with going to our website, Regulated Learning, because we do offer a variety. And also, you know, there's some schools that may be joining us, or educators from schools that don't even have access to OT. Elizabeth has had the opportunity to work in a country that didn't even have occupational therapy services offered. And so even just learning about the capacity that OTs that we have to support schools, I think is just learning in and of itself. And so I would encourage you to do that.
Absolutely. Thank you. And like, we're all sensory beings, we're all learning beings. And that's why I think for us, it is important, the tools that we have found to be so helpful, we want to share them. You know, we really do want to support educators to having those tools, because I feel like that is a big source of frustration for educators when they're dealing with behaviors that they're not sure of where they're coming from and how to approach them. A lot of the tools and techniques we share within Regulated Learning can support educators with having that background knowledge of some of additional reasons for behaviors, not only social emotional, but also the sensory. So we're here, we're happy to help. There is a 5-minute feedback if you have time, because we really want to make sure we are giving information that best supports your needs as you are growing and in your school or educational system. So please go ahead and take a minute for that feedback and share with us. And we are growing within the IFIP forum, so we will have more projects focused on certain situations or certain problem-based things and challenges, so we can work together through them. So the more people that join and the more feedback we get, the more things we can offer to really support your needs as a member. And I just want to say thank you very much for your time and attention. I know it's very precious. And we hope to see you in another event.
Thank you.